most precious early memories were of making, building, creating. And when we create, we inspire. Britain is a nation of great manufacturers and innovators, and what we make is loved by the world. We are harnessing new technologies that will drive the next generation of ideas and services. The fourth industrial revolution is here, and we are embracing it. We're pushing the boundaries of science and research and setting the standards for others to follow. At the heart of communities throughout the United Kingdom, we are manufacturing world-class products. Highly skilled people and innovative businesses, driven and inspired by a common vision, continue to build the industries of the future. This is business working for Britain. Manufacturing remains the lifeblood that courses through all industry. From the smallest niche provider to the biggest global player, engineering is at the core of everything we do. We're training the engineers and technicians of the future. And with the backing of government, an industrial strategy could reinvigorate business for decades to come. We are the leading manufacturing nation, export-focused and trading around the globe. Our past, a firm foundation for an even greater future. The UK manufacturing industries. Made in Britain. Loved by the world.
Good afternoon, everybody. How great is that film, by the way? Can we give that a round of applause? I think that deserves it. Trust you've all had a good lunch, and thank you to those of you who came to the session on supply chain optimization during lunchtime, and for those of you who have been getting your 7 tips from the 7 experts. We've got another packed afternoon for you of panel debates and our keynote speaker as well. It's been lovely catching up with so many people here as well. I think that's always a joy for me, is finding out what's going on in all the different manufacturers around the country and deciding on loads of places to broadcast from as well. So I've had lots of ideas for those too. I'm going to tell you a little story as well before we start this afternoon, because I often get asked who's like the most interesting person you've ever interviewed and that kind of thing. And so I'm going to tell you my Donald Trump story. So I know a couple of you know this one. So a couple of years ago, I interviewed him, and it was one of those things where when you're interviewing someone of that kind of caliber, they have a massive entourage of people who come with them, often like you see with politicians, and they're very like trying to control the situation. You've got 10 minutes with him. When he comes in the room, you start the interview, and then you finish it and you're out. And you're like, okay, don't ask him this question. Don't ask him about his ex-wife, his hair, his da-da-da. Right, okay. Got the picture. So anyway, so Mr. Trump comes into the room, and this is what he did. So he walked in, and he just looked me straight in the eye. I feel like I should do that with my hair. and he went to me. Oh, God, I won't do it like that. I'll do it without the accent as well. But he went, wow, you're so beautiful. You're so beautiful that I'm going to have to leave this room to make myself look better, because if we start this interview now, everyone's just going to be staring at you and not listening to me. That is what genuinely happened. And as you can imagine, as a good northern girl, you can imagine what my response was. Because I was so, I found it so funny, because I just thought you've totally misjudged how to talk to a female reporter. And so I just replied back, oh, love, I've heard better lines than that down Club Bongo. Which is true. Anyway, so there you go. So no matter what you think of his policies, he is a fill in the blank. Right, so I'm not allowed to have an opinion on the BBC. Right, so we are going to go on to our panel session, first one for the afternoon. This is Making Britain the Best Place to Do Manufacturing, a global perspective, and we have got 3 fantastic contributors for this one. We're going to tackle the big questions around how we ensure that the UK is best placed to be a world leader in manufacturing and attracting and retaining the best talent, the investment that's needed, and why companies should choose Britain as a place to do business, and what we we can do to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So please can I welcome to the stage our three speakers on this one. We've got Juergen Maier, who's CEO of Siemens UK. We've got Colin Lawther, who's Senior Vice President of Nissan Motor Manufacturing, and Stephen Cooper, who's a partner and Head of Industrial Manufacturing at KPMG. So give them a round of applause, please. Nice to see you. And I know you're not going to try the Trump intro with me. You're welcome.
Actually, I just need to leave the room. Going
Let's start with things off with you, Juergen, actually. So just give us, from your experience, obviously being the boss of Siemens, how you make your investment decisions and what your thoughts are on how the UK can actually stand out in manufacturing.
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, let's start on the very positive, and that is, the UK absolutely can be, and in many ways is, the best place to do manufacturing. We have 14 manufacturing sites here, very proud to have such a strong manufacturing presence. And one of those is undisputably the best factory Siemens has in the world. So that's pretty cool.
Fabulous.
That factory is in Congleton in Cheshire. Quite a lot of people go there and sort of look at some of the best practice that happens. So it absolutely can be done. The other 13, they're good. They're not quite in our absolute best in the world, but they're also very good, and they have to continue to, of course, work incredibly hard at their productivity and technology investments to make sure they stay ahead of the game, because they all know, and that's one of the key things, is they all know that they're in absolutely a globally competitive world, and if they don't continue to drive their productivity, invest in skills and technology, then there is a risk that somebody else may make a bid for that factory in other parts of the world. So that's one key thing. Now, in terms of why is the UK a good place for manufacturing, I'd say, well, there's probably three key ingredients. One, without a question, is skills. So despite all of our criticisms of our skills system, and by the way, there's a lot that needs to be done to continue to improve it, but actually, there are good people, highly qualified people that we can get to work in our factories and help us drive all of our improvements. The second is there is a very good technology base around, good universities, good R&D, good innovation. We're particular supporters of the catapult movement. We always felt that was missing in the UK space, so I think that's moved us forward a long way. And the third is, again, despite all of our criticisms, there is actually a pretty good sort of policy framework, tax system, and all of that supports us. So overall, it looks pretty good. So here we come on to the but. And the but is when you sort of look out wider into the manufacturing sphere, we don't share that same high level of productivity as that best factory we've got in the world in Congleton and Cheshire, and that goes for our own factories also. And very often the reason for it is quite simply we just don't invest enough. It's long-termism, it's investment, and it's investment particularly in automation, digital technology, and skills. And I know that all sounds a little bit simplistic, but if you look at whatever statistics you look at, then UK manufacturing underinvests when we compare ourselves to the other, and I've looked at various surveys, but if you look at the top 9 industrial nations in the world, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, we lag behind considerably in terms of investing, particularly in automation technologies. And actually there are some studies that say if we got up to the same level as Germany or Japan on automation levels, our productivity would increase by at least 20%, if not more, across UK manufacturing. So in terms of what I think we need to do is we now need to look forward to the next wave of investments. We've sort of missed the boat a little bit on robotics and automation that went for the last 20 years. And I think we've now, as a country, got to really look at whether industrial digitalization, digital technologies, collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, data analytics, all of those sorts of things, what we can do in that space to sort of leapfrog and to really try and see if we can use that to get ahead of the game, and with that really return ourselves to a position of being really the best place to do manufacturing.
Can I just ask as well, given that you're saying the Congleton plant is the one that you hold out there as being the best in the world, why is it so different there compared to the others?
Well, it's actually been a really, really long journey, and what just works incredibly well in Congleton is that mix of culture. So it's getting culture of continuous improvement, lean, Six Sigma, call it whatever you want, all of that continuous driving productivity, relentlessly, a passion for it, year by year by year, and then mixing in with that the equal amount of passion for staying ahead of the game and being on top of the technology journey. So it was the first factory that said, Industry 4.0, we are going to be an Industry 4.0 factory. That's it. And we're just going to become it. And quickly work out a vision for achieving.
From a leadership point of view, though, or just a whole, everyone from the shop floor to the top is the same? Because I'm just trying to work out how you can't then just replicate that in the other one.
Yeah, it absolutely. And I think, the only answer is these things do take leadership. And, and it's taken leadership over many years, but it's had, many leaders. So at the end of the day, you then have to conclude that it can't be down to, one leader, there really is a culture, and this really is a place that absolutely breathes and eats productivity, and it is very bottom up.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we'll come back to more of what you were saying. Colin, do you want to give us the thoughts from Nissan's perspective then, about your thoughts on, because obviously the plant up in Sunderland is incredibly productive and known for that across the world as well.
Yeah, we have a fantastic plant in Sunderland, but I'll start the story with a Nissan car, Qashqai. So if you think about the Nissan Qashqai, started the crossover movement, and I guess to keep Steph right, there are other crossovers available for other manufacturers. BBC, sweet.
Very good.
So if you look at the car, though, it was styled in Paddington for Europe. It was engineered in Cranfield and designed in Cranfield, and then it's built in Sunderland. And that car is now 10 years old, actually, in its third generation. And the car was launched before the Apple iPhone. So you can actually see how much technology has come on over the last 10 years. Now that car should have been 120,000 a year, and this year we'll make 320,000. And it's an iconic, stylish product because it was engineered for Europe by Europeans here in the UK. And that whole value chain doesn't exist in many places in the world, from styling, from R&D, right through to manufacturing. So if I now take the manufacturing element from the Sunderland plant, I celebrated the 30th birthday last year, been there a long time. Had a lot of bumps along the way, actually. It hasn't all been smooth sailing, and we've had a lot of headwinds to overcome. And the headwinds that you face need to be overcome by the people who are in the organisation. So all of us stand on the shoulders of the people who work in the organisations, and the better the skills are of the people who we have working for us, the more innovative and dynamic will be our businesses. And the success of Sunderland is based on the people who actually work there. So driving skills into business is an absolute cornerstone of making sure that we are competitive going forward in the future. We have a Renault-Nissan alliance. There's more than 50 big plants across the world. Sunderland is the second biggest and is always in the top 5 in terms of productivity. And it is there because there is a relentless drive to be number one through continuous benchmarking and a never say die, never give up attitude. And it's that spirit in the UK which drives us forward continuously. Because in all of our industries, if you stand still, you'll be caught and you'll die. And in our industries, 10 years ago, there was a big gap between some emerging nations and the UK. That gap is getting smaller continually. Now, we have to run really fast with innovation to stay in front, but the gap is narrowing. So then if you look towards, well, what will make Britain unique in the future, I'd like to put out the idea that we have a unique geography in the UK. We're an island nation. We have a long coastline. We have a lot of deep-sea ports. We have good logistics routes. So making in the UK is an ideal position for export outside the UK. And success for the UK can be based a lot on the export of parts, in particular from automotive. So 70% of the cost of a car is in parts. So the more robust the supply base, the more robust is the OEM, the Nissans of this world. So big companies, it's our responsibility to make sure supply companies, tier 1, tier 2, tier N, are very strong. So I think the industrial strategy that we have, starting with the government, should concentrate in a large part on the supply base, and it should look towards export so that we can stand on the shoulders of our suppliers.
And Stephen, from KPMG's perspective, obviously working with lots of different manufacturers, what are your thoughts on how we make it better?
I don't have any jokes or stories of Mr. Trump or any other comedy character, if that's the right phrase. But I do have a quote which I'll share with you, which I thought was quite appropriate. This is a guy called Kennedy in the 1960s, and he said, there's a Chinese curse which says, may you live in interesting times. Like it or not, we live in interesting times. They're times of danger and uncertainty, but they're also more open to the creative energy of men more than at any time in history. So if we sit here 50 years later, I think we can all recognise danger and uncertainty. We heard a lot about that this morning. But the creative energy that Juergen was talking about here in digitalisation. So we've been asking our clients what they think about how to make Britain great for manufacturing, how to continue its greatness, and they recognise, as we all do in the room, I think, innovation at the core of this. But one or two things that came out of our survey were, one, they're pleased we've got an industrial strategy, or at least a green paper anyway, which is something more than has been around for some time, and that's important. But they are saying that strategy has to be through Parliament. So if we look at some of the stuff that some of these sectors have been doing in our manufacturing world, that has gone through Parliament, and it's been successful partly as a result that somebody hasn't come along and disrupted it. The other piece is that they recognise massive enthusiasm for digitalisation, really enthusiastic and very excited. But there's a piece here that says more than half of them are saying we need help to understand what we should do. And so there's a really important point there, as well as money. I mean, unsurprisingly, money to help folk get on that digitalisation agenda and really take the opportunity by the scruff of the neck. So those are two interesting things for possibly Juergen in what you're doing, taking it, coming up with the answers. We've heard about skills. I'm not going to labour it, but this is a long-term strategy is needed for skill sets in our businesses, in our manufacturing businesses. It addresses something which we haven't really heard much about today, which is diversity. There's a whole pool of folk out there who don't get tapped up at the right time, at primary school age, whether they're boys or girls. I have 3 kids. One he's 11 today. He knows he's going to be an engineer. I'm not an engineer. And the 2 girls, they need to be persuaded that, that is a great thing to do, as Steph did. But that has to be really gripped properly, and not just sort of in 5 years' time, we're sitting here saying we've got a skills gap, STEM's a problem. And it is a real worry when we hear in the news this week about we don't have enough maths teachers. I mean, this is fundamental stuff, and it has to be dealt with, and it really does. And the other thing here is technical skills, different qualifications, making the graduates or the school leavers relevant on day one when they arrive at Siemens or Nissan or wherever else they're going to come and work, and not a year later when those businesses have had to train them up. The last thing I'd mention is collaboration. We read it in the Green Paper, and we hear it from clients, that without collaboration between companies, within sectors, across sectors, and within government, not just BAE's one department, but within government, without that collaboration, these opportunities are not going to be grasped. So those are one or two of the key things that we're hearing from clients and what's come out of this survey. But it's a fantastic time to be looking at the future, it really is. So I agree with these fellas here.
Yeah. Should we take a question from the floor at this point? It's only one of Yep, we'll just get a microphone to you. Just keep your hand up for us so they can see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart Russell from the Government of Western Australia here in London. I was interested, most of the talk this morning was how important the EU was to the UK. Can some of the panel give me some idea of how important the UK is to the EU? The other way around, please.
Yeah, Colin.
Yeah, let me take that one. So if you think about the UK economy, 5th biggest economy in the world, so everyone wants to sell into the UK. So if you look at the exchange rate, euro-pound exchange rate, all of a sudden, if you haven't got a pound cost base, selling euro-denominated or other currency-denominated products in the UK are not as profitable as they used to be. So we are seeing a large drive now where people who want to import to the UK actually have to have a GB pound content. So there is a lot of suppliers outside are trying to get sourced components in the UK so that they can balance their currency footprint. So I think when you look at the size of the UK as an economy, it's a big economy, and lots of people want to sell into the UK. And to do that, they want the UK to supply to them. So I think there is a balanced equation emerging as we move forward in the future. And I see there's a big opportunity for the UK to be a net exporter of many things.
Yeah, Juergen, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it's very important. So in Siemens, the UK is the fourth biggest business we have worldwide, and we import significantly, and I'm very pleased to say we export very significantly from here. So the fact that Great Britain is so important, I think, does give us hope that there will be able to be a deal that is done, which at the end of the day has to work for both sides. I mean, hopefully we're not going to turn this whole panel into Brexit, because I think industrial strategy is probably something which is a little bit more positive to talk about. But the only thing I would add on to that is that where there might be a difference is that a lot of our partners in the EU, and I count Germany to one of those, they obviously see business and the economics as very important, but they probably hold a higher priority also on the priority of a political union. And whereas in the UK, we tend to put absolutely at the top, our economic prosperity, and the sort of the union and the political aspects is not quite as high priority. So what I'm really saying is that to think that, the whole negotiations are going to hang on the fact that economically we're so important would probably be a false premise.
Stephen, can I ask you on the point of, we're hearing the importance of skills, about digitisation. For small companies, it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, when you've got the weight of Nissan and Siemens behind you, you can make a big difference. And I know you mentioned the supply chain and the work Nissan are doing with the supply chain. But what are you hearing from the smaller companies about the help that they need to be able to get the right skills and to be able to digitise?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Steph. The Siemens and the Nissans of this world are, I think you probably recognise probably a better place in terms of this. They need help. They really do need help, and that's come through loud and clear. And it is the smaller companies, you're quite right, who are coming out and saying we need help to understand how we approach this. And so I think it's through industry sectors, or it's through government, whether it's central or local government, through the catapult centres. All that infrastructure has to be brought to bear in an easily accessible form for them to be able to get, as you say, that opportunity. Because if you don't make it accessible, they haven't got the time to deal with the issue, and then they'll just fall away. The other piece here is that those at the top of the supply chain have a responsibility to help their entire supply chain right the way through. And I think that's a really important point for people to take on board and act upon. And I know a number of them are already.
Yeah, again, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's really, really fundamental, that question. And I think a lot of help is needed. And if I just look and compare to how, and obviously I'm able to draw better comparisons to Germany than anywhere else, is that the industry just organises itself better. And obviously in this space, Germany formed the Industry 4.0. And then what tends to happen is wherever you sit in the country, you sort of organise yourself your way into this initiative, Industry 4.0. What we do in this country is we say we want to digitalise our manufacturing, and then you've got an initiative that springs up over in Liverpool, another one in Greater Manchester, then there is something else that happens over around the sort of Sheffield cluster, and the coordination of all of that is not where it needs to be. By the way, each one of the individual initiatives is actually better than in a whole what I'm seeing going on in Germany, but we just don't get the clout and the might behind it all to better organise it and to channel the support and to engage the small companies.
So so you think these kind of hub areas don't necessarily work because they're not working together?
Well, they do work, but, you know, what we're missing is the bigger strategic picture. That's what we're actually, and the level of ambition of what we're trying to achieve, that then brings all of that together. Now, you know, I'm hoping and very hopeful that the Industrial Strategy Green Paper will start to bring that together. I mean, it is a bit of a kitchen sink, that Green Paper. It's sort of everything to everybody at the moment. But I'm not negative about that, because I think that's a great start point. And I think it's a call on everybody in this room to now get behind it and to say, how are we going to help focus that piece of paper to make sure we can better coordinate ourselves in these so-called sector deals. And indeed, you know, I'm very happy and pleased to be leading one of those, which is industrial digitalisation. And certainly, you know, one of my aims with that is to try and see whether we can get this bigger picture and this sort of strategic coordination that brings the bigger picture together.
Yeah.
And we'd absolutely echo that, because if you look at what Germany have done to try and get global standardisation along in the US, they're both further ahead. It may not be the right answer, but they're both further ahead. And unless we contribute and get our act together, you know, we won't be influencing those global standards, which are going to be so important.
Yeah, and given you mentioned Germany, are there any other countries where we should be learning from? Colin, any thoughts on kind of where we can get best practice that would help us here?
Yeah, we've got plants all over the world in all continents, and we benchmark regularly between the plants, and so we can understand where the best practices are. But one area which I think is going to be a fundamental breakthrough, and it's a digital area, and it is one of using big data to predict what the customers want. So we build what the customer wants before the customer orders it. And that is growing very strongly in Korea, in China, and in Japan. So if you think about 10 years ago, the average customer went to the dealer 7 times before buying a car. The customer goes to the dealer once now. And they go once because they've been on social media, they've been on websites, they've searched, they've configured cars, they've done a whole load of research. All of that data exists. So if we could capture that data, synthesize that data, we could predict what the customer was going to buy before they came in to the showroom. That's happening in the Far East at the moment. And I think that would be a massive advantage to us. But also, if we could only develop and order the right parts from our supply base, it would make their life much more simple as well.
Yeah, that's a bit like when I was talking to one of the bosses at Google who was telling me that then their aim with driverless cars is not because they want to build cars, they just want to know where everyone's going. And
Yeah, big brother.
yeah, and that's the data they need. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah, we'll get one here and here. If you just keep your hands up, yeah. Thank you.
Richard Elsden, 2015. The Secretary of State is a passionate believer in place, and he used that word numerous times this morning. If you leave aside infrastructure, what advice will you want to give the Secretary of State about how to make place work, given that most Secretaries of State in his position have lamentably failed?
Yeah, who wants to start us on that? Go on, Stephen.
This is an interesting one, isn't it? I think I'll come back to collaboration, actually, because I think there is a responsibility for business as well as government to look at society and what's happening and what's not so good. And collaboration with government, whether it's through sectors or companies, I believe is the only sensible approach that can work. But mandating that you are going to have that industry in that location, in Liskeard or wherever you want to pick, I think unless it's thought through very carefully, it is not necessarily going to work. It's those ecosystems that are going to drive wealth and job creation across the country. But it's not just a government thing, it's not just a business thing, it's a collaborative effort. That would be my take on it.
Juergen.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, the good news is you know, we are talking about it much more, so at least Place has those numerous references in the paper. I think ultimately the journey has got to take us more in the way of proper devolution. You know, a lot of the devolution we're doing at the moment is more sort of devolution in name as opposed to really letting fiscal control and budgetary control go to the regions. And I think in the end, that's got to be where it ends up, but you can't do it overnight. You've got to make sure you've got the right governance in processes in place. But in the end, there's got to be more local decision making. Having said that, it's got to be within this framework that I talked about. So that would be my advice to the Secretary of State. You know, get a strong strategic framework that everybody can organise themselves in behind, devolve more power, which includes fiscal power. And then the third piece of advice I would give is actually to the regions themselves. This is all not going to happen unless the regions organise themselves better and actually put forward the propositions and put forward the actual call for why it is we need this more devolution, why we need the fiscal powers, and indeed what we're going to do about it to create more value in our economy.
Colin.
So maybe I can add to both points, really. You know, the industrial strategy is under the stewardship of BEIS, but it's not owned by BEIS. It's our industrial strategy. And we have to input to it to make sure it's what we believe we need from an industrial point of view. And not only is it not just our industrial strategy under the stewardship of BEIS, it's a country industrial strategy. And I guess nearly everybody in the room has probably got stories about transport, environment, BEIS, Treasury not being linked together. You know, so linking the government together, to take Stephen's point about collaboration, or the whole country needs to link together for the industrial strategy. For us to think that it's a BEIS initiative would be a big mistake. It's a country initiative which is under the stewardship of BEIS, and we need to input to it to make sure it's what we want.
A question at the front here.
Kostas Pitas from Reuters. I wanted to ask you, Colin, there's been a lot of discussion today about Brexit and the pound and how the fall in the pound has been beneficial to exporters. For Nissan, on one hand, your cars are cheaper because you're exporting them in pounds. On the other hand, you're importing a lot of parts in euros, which will presumably be more expensive. So have you worked out whether the Brexit-induced fall in the pound is a net benefit or disadvantage? And just something the Secretary of State mentioned, he was praising the car industry. He said the way that the supply chain has developed, the interconnectedness of it. How much of your supply chain do you share with Vauxhall in the UK? The suppliers who supply to Nissan and to Vauxhall?
Yeah, there's quite a common supply base in the UK, but from a Nissan point of view only, when you look at the revenue that we generate in terms of selling cars, whether they're import cars, export cars, we do not have enough pound content in the cars which we produce. So we need to spend billions more pounds on the cars we produce to balance our currency footprint. So from our point of view, buying more in the UK is a corporate direction. It's a direction we're strongly pushing in. And to echo the point that I made earlier, if you are importing cars into the UK and they're denominated only in euro or in yen or in dollar and you have no GB pound, then you're currency exposed. So there's a big push at the moment for people in continental Europe, OEMs, to buy more parts from the UK. So we are exposed. We need to have more GB pound content, but also our alliance partners and other OEMs in the continent also need more GB pound content. So the supply base, if you follow that logic, must grow. We must have a bigger supply base in the UK. Now, unfortunately, we've offshored quite a lot of technology from 10, 15 years ago, and we need government to find a way to bring that technology back to the UK, which has been offshored in the past.
So are you worse off overall as a result of the fall in the pound?
So he's just asking, are you worse off overall as a result of the pound falling?
Well, we're exposed to not having enough GB pounds, so we're slightly worse off than we were in January, February of the year before the currency changed dramatically.
Yeah. Okay, let's take another question. Is there anyone who would like to ask one? Yep, I've got one at the back there. Thank you. Can you stand up for us so we can have a good look at you as well? Thanks. Thank you.
Christopher Simpson. There's been frequent reference to digitalisation 4.0. It occurs to me that that is very dependent upon having modern plant, modern machinery, modern control systems. If you have clapped out plant, clapped out control systems, then may I submit 4.0 as a degree of irrelevance to it? I'd just like to make the point that in Germany, they invest in productive plant and machinery about 7 times as much as the UK. I'd like your comments, please, on where you see the priorities.
Yeah, so how you achieve this level of productivity and digitisation if your machinery is not up to scratch?
Well, I mean, I'd say I'd give 2 answers to that question. You know, and that links to my earlier point. You know, obviously, if you've got a lot of clapped out machinery, then you've got to start damn well quick to work out what you're going to do about it. And you need to do that, and you're absolutely right, digitalisation directly might not be relevant to that. Having said that, if you were to only do that and not keep an eye on what's the opportunity through future digital, which of course also includes, you know, we're including technologies of collaborative robots, of additive manufacturing and all of those things in that, you know, then I think you'd be driving a pretty dangerous strategy. And as a matter of fact, you might be lucky and you might find that actually you don't need to replace some of your clapped out machinery with a direct one-to-one. You know, you might actually be able to replace it with something more digital that actually in capital terms is actually less to invest in. So I think you need to do both, but to just keep a strategy on replacing your clapped out stuff with like for like is probably not a good strategy.
Yeah, any thoughts you want to add, Stephen?
Well, I think government's got a role to play here in terms of incentives and tax incentives that have been let slip. So I think some of the capital allowances that used to be around, those should be reintroduced. And I know EF are campaigning on business rates, but you know that's another play here that's relevant in encouraging further investment.
Yeah.
That type of activity.
Yeah, maybe I can add a point as well. If your equipment is completely clapped out, then you know you're beyond hope, to be honest. But
it's a nice, positive way to.
If it's completely gone, but it's not all about new machinery. You know, new machinery tends to work, and then at some point in time, it starts to fail, and it's this period where the equipment is becoming worn out or is wearing, where a lot of digital analysis can really help us. So we are working with Siemens amongst others on taking condition-based monitoring, so vibration or temperature or speed or many different parameters from lots of different robots, for example, putting them all up into the cloud, doing some data analysis and predicting when the facilities are going to fail. So you're not in breakdown mode anymore, and you're not in preventative maintenance and replacing things before they do fail. You're just taking it to the point where you need to change out, and that's really very efficient. And I think the management of not completely destroyed equipment, but aging equipment is where we can get a huge amount of efficiency, because we're not going to replace everything with new immediately. So this management of the middle age facility is quite important, I think, and the digital power is going to help us do a lot more in that area.
Should we take a question from this gentleman here? We'll just get a mic to you.
Yeah, hello, Stephen Wright of Thorite. Segueing into the conversation here about productivity, we keep complaining about productivity, but most of the grant structures that have been in place for the last 20-odd years are about encouraging more employment growth. And I've had conversations with people from our local LEP and with Philip Hammond about moving away from that and about focusing on actual productivity and investment in equipment. And maybe there is an opportunity in the coming future as more of the grants move away from being European-funded grants, and maybe some of the claims that we should have on money that has been going previously to Europe should actually be about increasing investment into productive equipment rather than necessarily into unproductive people, and accept that we need to make the investment in plant as well as people. I'd like comments from the floor on that, please.
Yeah, Stephen, got thoughts on that?
Yes, I think. I mean, we need both. We need investment in skills and people. That's a given. That has to happen. But we need to increase the amount of investment that we are putting into our machinery and our automation and all of that. So anything that is going to support that approach, that's going to support businesses to enable them to do that, has got to be supported.
Yeah, Juergen, it's a good point, isn't it?
Well, it's a very good point, but actually I think the answer is it's definitely both. Now, the $6 million question is, you know, if you put all of your focus on technology, will that in the end actually displace more jobs than you create? Now, we don't have any future data to tell us that, or we do have some. By the way, as part of the review, which I'm going to be working on, we're going to try and see if we can get some evidence around this point. But if you go back into history, what has been shown is that the nations that have invested the most, especially in robotics and advanced technologies, they've actually created more employment and not less. And there has already also been studies that say that if in the UK we were to get up to the robotics, and I'm just going to single in on robotics, and I know it's much broader than that, but if you just invested as much in robotics as Germany or Japan has done, not just would we increase our productivity, but we would actually increase our employment. And the figure actually is about 7%. We would increase productivity by 20%, and we would increase employment by 7%. So I think the answer is you need to do both, and you need to do it very strategically to make sure that you don't end up making the mistake of displacing more jobs than you could otherwise create.
Yeah.
So the simple way that I look at this is we get hung up on productivity, and productivity is not an objective. Many people think productivity is what we're trying to achieve. It's not. It's only a strategy to improve competitiveness, amongst other things. And if you improve competitiveness, then you get more business. So become more productive, become more competitive, get more business, and it's a virtuous circle. And I think often we get hung up on productivity is the objective, and it's not. It's just a strategy.
We're going to have make you a little bit more productive now. I'm going to ask you a question again. So if you could take your keypads, which should be still attached to your chairs, hopefully. And we'll ask you another question. This one is about Brexit.
Not Brexit.
When do you think your company will start to see benefits flowing from Brexit? So we've got A, we already are, B, short term, next 5 years, mid-term, long term, we're unlikely to see any benefits now or in the future. Don't know.
Yeah.
So remember, press the letter which corresponds. Yeah, it's fairly mixed, isn't it? Quite a lot of you don't know. Some there saying, well, the majority, 19%, saying short term within the next 5 years. But
Interesting. It is, isn't it?
what's interesting about that? Well, 25% they're saying we're unlikely to see any benefits now or in the future. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, quite evenly split that.
Yeah, it is evenly split, isn't it? I suppose I'm a little bit surprised by how much of the short-term benefits. I mean, I don't know. I would imagine exchange rate, which was your question at the front, might play into that a little bit. You know, I mean, my personal view on that, to sort of, you know, to bet your industrial future on exchange rate is a pretty dangerous path to go, especially, you know, when your balance of payments is the wrong way round. So ultimately, it's bound to have an inflationary and therefore a negative effect on the economy. So I don't know. It may be that. Maybe the short-term benefit, you know, is to be off-balanced in the future on that exchange rate point.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Colin, on it?
I think there's things you can influence and there are things you can't. And the history you can't influence. So it's our responsibility to everyone who works for us and all of our shareholders to find the opportunities that do exist. And when you look, there are opportunities. There are headwinds and roadblocks which we need to overcome, but there are opportunities as well. You know, the more this unpacks and opens out, the more opportunities we will find.
Just to wrap things up then, because I'm conscious of time, and to leave us on a positive note, just give us what your thoughts are on the kind of biggest opportunity you see ahead for UK manufacturing. Stephen, do you want to start us off on that, what you think?
The biggest opportunity, I mean, I'd come back to what Juergen kicked us off with, which is the future, the technology-driven with the right skills. And that has to be the future. It's not in mass, you know, millions and millions and millions of people doing low-skill work. It's in that high-value manufacturing, and that has to be the piece that we grasp.
Yeah. Colin, final word on opportunity?
Yeah, I think we have everything in the UK, you know, whether it's deep research projects or it's world-class universities, through to stylists, through to engineers, through to manufacturing technology, and more importantly, coming in the future from digital analysts. So we have everything in place. case now is joining it all together and being very focused on what we need to do. So if we can join together our strengths, I think we are one of the few nations in the world that has everything in place.
Yeah, Juergen.
Well, it has to be digitalisation as the key area, and I think within that there are two key opportunities, and one is, you know, the faster adoption and implementation of it, which helps drive productivity, etc., as we've discussed. But the second and very important area is that we create the new jobs and the new industries in the UK that will actually be in the supply of those digital technologies. And of course, some of those might be manufacturing, but some of those might be sort of software and service type jobs. And I think that's a whole new digital economy that we can grow.
And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about in our next panel debate. So that's a good point to end. So you've introed that very well for us. Put your hands together for our panellists, Juergen, Maier, Colin, Lawther. Thank you.